Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Became the Guardian of All Creation Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
6 a.m. Westgate. Tazuna arrived at the meeting time to find the same long-haired blonde teen from yesterday engaged in a staring contest with a nine-tailed fox doll. The teen was holding the fox doll right in front of his face, so neither of them could miss the other blinking. Tazuna considered calling the boy insane, but after what happened yesterday, he'd rather not agitate him. The blonde eventually broke free, muttering a soft damn and sitting against a nearby tree. As the bridge builder approached, he gave Tazuna a small wave. "Hello, Tazuna-san, I'm not sure when my teammates will arrive, but I'm pretty sure Hatake-san will be about 3 hours late, so I hope you have something to do." With that, the blonde closed his eyes in meditation, his fox plush perched atop his head. The bridge builder was surprised that the Jounin would be 3 hours late, but figured it was a ninja thing, so he took out a copy of Ika Ika Paradise and began reading to pass the time. He could swear he felt something staring at him every now and then, but dismissed it as a ninja village thing. When the sensation became unbearable, he looked up from his book to see who or what was staring at him. To his surprise, no one was around. It was just him and the blonde meditating with the fox doll. The fox doll was staring in his general direction, but since it was a doll, it couldn't be the source of his feelings, could it? No way. There must be some hidden ninjas somewhere. He resumed reading his book. A few seconds later, the feeling became more intense, and he looked around warily. He was still only aware of the doll staring at him. He was starting to feel a little uneasy. Later, at 6:30 a.m., Tazuna was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He was certain that doll was staring at him, but it was only a doll, right? When he looked away, it seemed to flick its tails in a menacing manner, but when he returned his gaze, it was still. He was beginning to perspire, wondering if it was really a good idea to seek assistance from a ninja village. This was the scene at which Sasuke arrived. Tazuna, sweating buckets and shaking like a leaf in a gale as she stared at the doll perched on their teammate's head. Sasuke shrugged, unconcerned, and began to brood. Sekura was concerned about their client and inquired as to what was wrong. He replied that he could swear the plush toy was alive. Sekura had completely forgotten Naruto's introduction speech because her mind had dismissed it as not pertaining to Sasuke. The teen also didn't like animating the doll in front of Konoha people because it would probably incite a mob to attack him, requiring him to take valuable time out of his day to thwart the attack, so he only used it to taunt Kakashi when no one else was looking. She told the man it was a plush doll and to stop worrying about it before attempting to persuade Sasuke to go on a date, as this man had taken up all of her non-Sasuke time. Naruto almost snickered as he heard this from deep within his meditation. Kyuubi was a cunning little fox who was always pulling pranks on people and wouldn't have it any other way. He murmured softly, just loud enough for the doll to hear him, before deepening his meditation, focusing intently on the mana flowing through him and working hard to control it so that the spells didn't require as much to have the desired effect. "Nice work, Kyuubi-kun, I like how you work." The doll gave a toothy grin, scaring the bridge builder completely out of his wits when he saw the doll was grinning. In addition, he appeared to have sharp teeth for a cuddly toy. The fox didn't mind the suffix to his name, but Naruto could only call him that if he got belly scratches. He'd been paired with the teen for so long that he'd grown attached to him, particularly because the blonde shared his love of fighting and sadism. The fox licked his lips tauntingly, causing the bridge builder to collapse into a fetal position and muttering about evil dolls coming to get him. If he continues to be stressed, he will most likely lose years from his life. After 2.5 hours, in a puff of smoke, Kakashi arrived to find the bridge builder rocking back and forth in a fetal position, mumbling about evil dolls plotting his demise and that he wasn't insane. Sekura's eyes were filled with stars and hearts, and she was salivating like a dog for a bone. Sasuke was staring at his third student, and you could almost feel him thinking, I want that power. His final student. He was playing. Indeed, Naruto was shaping raw elements and playing a complex game of toy soldier with them. He had created very detailed human golems out of the ground, and they were all running in fear, shrieking realistically in despair. He'd fashioned a clone of his Kyuubi doll out of fire, and it was tearing the poor earth golems apart with a squeaky roar. Lightning, wind, and water were combined to form small thunderclouds above the battleground, complete with realistic weather effects. Naruto wore the real Kyuubi plush on his head and laughed maniacally as the flame Kyuubi annihilated the poor earth people. Kakashi coughed to draw attention to himself, signaling that it was time to leave. Naruto shrugged, the elemental battleground dissipating into thin air, leaving only scorches on the grass to indicate lightning strikes and the locations of the flame rampage. Kyuubi the blonde stood up slowly so as not to dislodge the plush from his head, and carried a small backpack containing a change of clothing. Sasuke followed, a much larger pack on his back filled with clothing, food, and extra supplies. Sakura was straining under the strain of her own pack. It wasn't a large pack, but it was packed to the brim with makeup, accessories, clothing, hairbrushes, combs, and a little bit of food. They walked out of the west gate at a civilian's pace, through the forest, as they formed a loose defensive formation. After a few hours, they were moving along at a reasonable pace when a rather noticeable puddle was spotted along the road. Naruto, unable to feel any real water in the puddle, immediately recognized it as a genjutsu to hide nins in, and had to fight hard not to burst out laughing. Sakura was too busy trying to make sweating profusely from slight workout look attractive to catch Sasuke's attention, who was glaring up at the sky, as if willing his Uchiha might to make the sun stop shining, as Uchihas were never supposed to tan. Naruto had to stifle a groan as Kakashi seemed to be the only other person who recognized the puddle for what it was. Didn't the academy teach them anything? So far, I've only seen basic projectile throwing, illusionary clones that can only distract, and the ability that most 5-year-old ninja children have to use the henge as well as the standard kawarami that all nins learn. What did they do all those years? Kakashi had tapped Sasuke on the shoulder and whispered in his ear about the true nature of the puddle, hoping that the Uchiha would back away, and allow his teammate to fight the nins hiding in the puddle without him. Of course, this was a good plan. Unfortunately, he did not consider something when designing it. Sasuke always had to prove he was the best, and he couldn't prove he was the best if he wasn't fighting, so Sasuke would be fighting. The group had just passed through the puddles when the two nins attacked from hiding. Their weapon of choice was an unusual one. They both wore a single gauntlet on the opposite arm. The one on the left was holding the gauntlet in his right hand, while the one on the right was holding it in his left. The gauntlets had wicked-looking spikes protruding from the front, and judging by the purple substance, they were poisoned as well. The two weapons were linked by a linked, razor-sharp chain that they threw around Kakashi, and pulled, instantly severing him into 6 pieces. Sakura froze and screamed in terror after witnessing her teacher's death. Sasuke had tensed slightly because the man was supposed to assist him with his Sharingan, and now he was dead. He blamed Itachi, so everything was fine. Naruto was staring at a location in the forest, silently pondering whether he could blow up his teacher's hiding place and claim he died defending the team from Nuke Nin. Sasuke charged at the two nin with a kunai in his hand, interrupting his thoughts about killing his teacher. He had pinned the links of the razor chain to the trunk of a tree with a kunai followed by a shuriken, forcing the two to disconnect the chain in order to fight effectively. He was able to land a few good punches and kicks, but his weapon was quickly knocked away. Kakashi was about to intervene when he realized Sasuke wasn't going to win when Naruto decided to join the fight, as he was itching to fight something. He raised his right hand to his face, a slight purple aura enveloping him, before shoving his hand forward into a palm thrust in the air, as if attacking an imaginary enemy. Before the results were revealed, he uttered a single word. Arrow. A hurricane-force gust of wind slammed into the two brothers, heaving them bodily into the air as the winds began to circle them, ripping through clothing and slicing at exposed flesh before slamming them both into a tree, knocking them out instantly. Both unconscious nins were heavily bleeding from wind-inflicted wounds, but they wouldn't die. Sasuke was furious at his blonde teammate for stealing his spotlight, and Sakura was still too shocked by her teacher's death to act. Kazuna realized that the girly one was indeed the most powerful of the three, and he would be wise not to mention his appearance again. Kakashi finally appeared in front of Naruto and Sasuke, shocking both the Uchiha and his pink-haired parasite, who had assumed he was dead. Naruto, on the other hand, simply snorted at the man before asking his question. What? You're too lazy to fight on top of being too lazy to train us. The gray-haired Jounin glared at him before turning to Sasuke and praising his work with an eye smile. Naruto, why didn't you step in sooner? Sasuke could have been hurt in close combat with those two. The blonde blinked at the man before looking at his doll, as if seeking confirmation from the plush that his teacher had indeed asked that question. Finally, he returned his gaze to the man, his amethyst eyes mockingly staring at him. He replied, his voice mocking and sarcastic, but still giving the Jounin a good reason. What? You wanted a demolition specialist to attack targets within close quarters of the Uchiha air. Are you insane? I could have killed him. I really should have done that instead, now that I think about it. He mumbled the last part to his doll, not allowing anyone else to hear it. The plush toy snickered and nodded briefly before becoming motionless again. Kakashi verbally interrogated their client until he finally broke down and admitted that he was being pursued by an extremely wealthy man who opposed the bridge's construction. He eventually resorted to guilt-tripping the team, which caused Sakura to cry at his story, Sasuke to brood, and Naruto to yawn boredly. When asked if they wanted to continue the mission, the blonde was the first to speak up. I'd like to get a challenge at some point because it gets boring when I'm not pushed to my limits. Sasuke agreed next, because he wanted to beat the black mage at his own game, and he wanted to prove his Uchiha superiority to the blonde, who, unlike the rest of the village, seemed unaffected by the mere mention of his last name. Sakura was terrified of fighting again. But as soon as Sasuke agreed, she agreed as well, because it would allow her to spend more time with him, and she was sure Sasuke would come to her rescue if she was in trouble. Right, let her continue to daydream. They kept going, crossing the sea that separated Nami no Kuni from Fire Country. They got to see the unfinished bridge while on the boat, which had Sakura in awe of its size, Sasuke glaring at it as if daring it to try to get more respect than him, and Naruto blinking at it before wondering why they built it so high up from the water, given how calm the sea was here all year. There's no need for 40 feet of elevation when 10 feet will suffice. They arrived at Nami no Kuni and disembarked to return to the other side. They continued walking towards their client's house, though Naruto had the uneasy feeling that something bad was about to happen. After 2 hours, they were almost to their client's house when a heavy mist began to fall. It was obviously a ninja's work because it was early afternoon. Naruto and Kakashi were aware of this, but Sasuke and Sakura was concerned about the mist's effect on her hair. When Sasuke, a Uchiha, tried to glare at the mist for blocking out the sunlight, he couldn't. Naruto just shrugged, hoping that whoever was responsible for the mist would get rid of the two. Of course, he knew they'd survive because Kakashi would save them, but damn it, he could have his own hopes and dreams. As he waited for whoever created the mist to attack, he began to scratch his Kyuubi doll's belly. It only took a few minutes for the mist's creator to appear, as a whirling slab of metal spun through the air, the sound muffled slightly by the mist. Kakashi and Naruto, on the other hand, heard it, Kakashi because of his extensive training and participation in the Second Shinobi War, and Naruto because he had to train his ears to learn when Lulu Onechan would test his reflexes by using whispered thunder spells, forcing him to learn how to dodge an ambush. It took 4 months and thousands of lightning-induced burns for him to finally hear her whisper the spell and leap away. Kakashi's yell of "Get down" jolted him out of his reverie, and he backflipped over the giant sword, clutching his doll close to his chest to keep it from falling. He saw the owner of the sword standing on the hilt of it as he landed softly on the ground, as the blade was buried deep within a tree trunk across the clearing. The man was quite tall, and he must have been quite strong to lug around the heavy Zenbato on a daily basis. The scratched mist hid I-8, his black and white camouflage pattern leg and arm warmers, and the bandage mask covering the bottom half of his face were the most noticeable aspects of him. If the creases near his eyes were any indication, the man was grinning as he spoke in a rough voice. Sharingan no Kakashi, eh? It's no surprise the demon brothers failed. Naruto couldn't help but snort in mockery, prompting the Nuke Nin to look in his direction. Blondie, what are you laughing at? Naruto blinked at the man before turning to look at Kakashi, who appeared to be plotting ways to get Naruto killed against the man. Let's make things easier for him. Hadake abandoned us to observe in the foliage. I doubt he'd fight hard for anything other than his beloved porn novels. The ex-Kiri Nin looked surprised, then looked at Kakashi, who was scratching the back of his head sheepishly. He burst out laughing as he drew the sword from the tree and charged at the group. Did he? Well, let's see if he tries a little harder to fight when his team's life is at stake. Naruto tapped his index finger against his chin as he considered it, then placed the Kyuubi doll on top of his head before taking a step forward. Actually, I believe he's trying to kill me, and I'm sick of his pathetic attempts. Plus, I've been looking for a challenge for a while now. What do you say? Up for a one-on-one water fight? I haven't had a good challenge in those in ages. The Mist Swordsman blinked at the teen, then laughed even louder this time. You're going to fight me. You're just a genin. Naruto shook his head, raising an arm to his face and flaring his mana as he prepared a spell. Then suit yourself, I'll go first, Watera. 3 thick columns of water shot out from around him, 1 on each side and 1 in front of him, all heading straight for Zabuza. The Kiri Nin was astounded by the teen's ability, as he appeared to have drawn water from the air itself. Only years of experience allowed him to avoid the pounding columns of water that carved 3 matching deep craters in the ground where he had once stood. He jumped back onto a lake to the side of the clearing, quickly passing through hand seals before summoning his jutsu. Water element, exploding water shockwave. A large wave slammed into the genin team, and all but one of them jumped out of the way, with Kakashi taking Tezuna with them. Naruto stood in the clearing, staring impassively at the approaching wave. He seemed to backhand the air in front of him as he channeled pure mana through his hand. The wave, which was the intended target of the manipulation, crashed to the ground, with the main force deflected away from him. Zabuza was taken aback because he had expected the genin to be written off and killed right away. However, he began to grin as he realized that this teen might pose a challenge to him, something that only Haku seemed to be capable of recently. What do you know? You appear to have talent. What's your name, boy? Naruto smirked, raising his arms above his head as his doll came to life, terrifying the bridge builder who had finally convinced himself that the doll was inanimate. Sakura and Sasuke were too preoccupied with fawning and brooding over power to notice. A light purple aura flared around the blonde, and his hair began to lift into the air as he accumulated energy. Naruto, my name is Naruto, and I'm Waterga. As the water around the teen sprang to life, both arms slammed downward, the doll on his head mimicking his actions with his tails. A faint globe of water arose from the surroundings, its insides churning and twisting before exploding in the direction of Zabuza, carrying a crushing force as the agitated water surged towards the mist nin. The ashen-skinned man jumped to the surrounding trees to avoid the water, which crushed the surrounding landscape and leveled over a dozen trees. He barely avoided being caught in the spell by jumping over it from the treetops. As he descended, his hands were already forming a new jutsu, calling out as he touched down on the calmer waters behind the surge. Suryuiden Suten. The jutsu gathered the water, literally flooding the clearing, and forced it into a roughly dragon-like shape. The water dragon twisted and twined itself around Zabuza before coiling up and springing forward, aimed squarely at Naruto. The teen seemed vaguely interested in the jutsu before shrugging and raising his right hand, lowering it in a swift chopping motion augmented by his magic. As the water dragon approached, it split cleanly down the middle, striking him on either side but leaving him unharmed. The swordsman's jaw almost dropped as he witnessed the feat, which had only been repeated by his own apprentice. His surprise was short-lived, as the boy quickly retaliated. It was an interesting technique, but I think it's time to call it quits. As the boy began to cast an even more powerful spell, the doll jumped off his head and onto the dry ground directly in front of his feet, its tail swirling and flicking. As the energy was gathered, the violet aura darkened and the wind swirled around the teen. Water globules formed in the air and rose from the clearing's water, accumulating just above the blonde. The water from the entire clearing had formed a massive blob of water above the teen's head in less than 3 seconds, measuring more than 30 feet in diameter. As a shocked silence broke, it lowered itself in front of the boy's body, hiding him from view. Waterja. The blob of water exploded forward, forming a tidal wave 40 feet tall and easily 20 feet across. It descended on top of the swordsman, who was too stunned to even move out of the way of the technique, and slammed down. The pulverizing force of the wave hurled him through the air and slammed him into a tree trunk, where 3 senbon needles embedded themselves in his neck. Naruto let the spell refill the drained lake and disperse back into the air to replace the missing water molecules, his thirst for a challenge finally satisfied. A hunter nin jumped from the tree line and picked up Zabuza's corpse, thanking them before disappearing in a swirl of mist. For a variety of reasons, Kakashi was both terrified and frustrated by his third student. First and foremost, he had demonstrated why he was a demolition specialist and could most likely kill him. Second, the boy had just defeated a class nuke nin and not only survived, but also appeared to be only slightly winded from the massive elemental manipulation he had pulled off without hand seals. Finally, he was frustrated because the teen did not die and his Sharingan was unable to replicate those techniques. When the boy used his abilities, it was as if no chakra was flowing through him at all. Sasuke's face was obscured by his hair as he stared down at the ground. Why does he have to be so frail? Why did the class's dobe have so much power while he, Uchiha, did not? It made no sense. Finally, a thought pierced his angst. What if he got the teen to teach him? Surely he could use those techniques more effectively than the dobe. He nodded to himself. He'd just have the boy teach him and then kill Itachi. Sakura, on the other hand, paid no attention to the fight. She was too preoccupied with Sasuke. Tazuna was unable to form a coherent sentence as she pointed to the doll that was now in the boy's arms. Though the doll in question was motionless, words like doll, alive, not crazy, and out to get me could be heard. Of course, because Sasuke was too preoccupied with his teammates' power, he didn't notice the doll moved during the fight. And Kakashi refused to say anything about the plush toy, too annoyed that he had previously lost a fight to it. Tazuna is a pity. Naruto returned to his team, almost. Slightly. Happy? No. It must be a lighting effect. Most people noticed that his hair was back in place after the fight, as if it hadn't just floated behind him while fighting, and that he was completely dry while the rest of the ground was muddy and squishy from the extensive water fight. Sakura was channeling Sasuke's angst as she mentally grumbled about his hair, while inner Sakura raged against the situation. Damn him and his flawless hair. Shinero, how did he get his hair that way? It outperforms ours. Aside from crazy banshees with split personalities, the blonde simply cocked his head to the side and asked, mockingly innocently, "What?" Kakashi simply sighed in frustration, while Sasuke considered how to approach his teammate about training him, and Sakura pondered his perfect hair. Tazuna was still pointing at his doll and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. The teen spoke up again, slightly irritated by the silence. "Shall we proceed to Tazuna's house now?" The bridge builder nodded briefly before walking ahead of them, glancing over his shoulder at the doll in the teen's arms, which he swears was smirking at him. On the way to Tazuna's house, Sasuke finally made a decision about how to train his teammate, and spoke. "Train me, dope." Yes, he had spent quite some time wondering how he could get his teammate to train him, and 3 words in a rude, short sentence were all he could come up with. Given his incredible mental prowess, he is truly a modern marvel. The blonde blinked in surprise, saw the almost smug glint in Kakashi's eye, and responded the same way he did to the council members in Konoha. No. If you want training, get it done by our teacher. Don't bother me with your petty revenge kick." Sasuke raged, turning to give the blonde his patented Uchiha death glare, and asked, "How come you won't train me?" Naruto assumed a contemplative stance, placing the doll on his head and narrowing his eyes as if looking into the distance, his index finger tapping his chin. He seemed to reach a decision and gave the Uchiha his answer after remaining that way for quite a few minutes, during which the remaining group had stopped to watch. And not going to. Everyone wanted to train a Uchiha, so Sasuke nearly exploded in rage at this statement. Clearly, the blonde had not heard of the clan's greatness, and he was about to explain why the Uchiha clan was so great when the blonde elaborated. "My techniques are personal, and I refuse to teach anyone else how to use them. Don't even try to steal them with your thieving eye technique. My bloodline allows me to use them without hand seals, which means you couldn't replicate the effects without years of trial and error." Kakashi's brow furrowed in suspicion at his alleged bloodline. Nobody was able to overcome the Sharingan's power. The Rasengan technique was the only one that could not be replicated because it was pure chakra manipulation. But this boy didn't even use chakra, or his eye would have picked it up. His mind entertained the idea that his student was using Yauki, demon energy, to perform the techniques, and he began to believe that his student was the Kyuubi, not the doll. As they made their way to Tazuna's house, he turned his head to stare at the blonde. If the boy did not want to teach Sasuke, he would force him to. When they arrived at Tazuna's house, Sakura and Sasuke were in the midst of an internal angst rant about different aspects of their blonde teammate, and Kakashi was debating how to force the blonde to train the Uchiha. The man's house was actually a renovated inn, so they each had their own room. Dinner was a low-key affair, but it was delicious thanks to Tazuna's daughter, Tsunami. Her son, Inari, however, ruined the meal by exclaiming, "You're all going to die. Nobody can compete with Gato," just as the child stormed up to his room. Naruto looked up to the plush toy on his head and had to hold back a laugh as a thought occurred to him. That boy could teach Sasuke the true meaning of angst. His gloomy black cloud was twice the size of Uchiha's. That individual must be a prodigy in the art of brooding. Naruto went up to his room after saying goodnight to his family. He cast a few magical wards against intruders before slipping into bed, the fox doll clutched to his chest. The following morning, Kakashi decided to greet them in his own unique way as they all headed down to breakfast, with Sakura's angst intensified when she realized her blonde teammate's hair was just as perfect as ever. Zabuza is still alive and well. This made Naruto snicker, which prompted Sasuke and Sakura to break out of their gloom and doom mode and glare at him. Kakashi joined in on the glare, not wanting to be mocked. "Is there something you find amusing, Naruto?" As he replied, the blonde in question made an innocent face, but his purple eyes seemed to sparkle with impish delight. "Well, I'm just surprised it took you this long to realize the Hunter Nin was a fake. I was just toying with the man. If I really wanted to kill him, I would have used lightning techniques instead of fighting water with water. You didn't really think he'd die from a water technique, did you? The hunter nin placed him in a near-death state with the needles hitting a vital pressure point in his neck. Kakashi's glare became even more intense as he sent Sasuke and Sakura down to breakfast without them, claiming he needed to speak with Naruto about something. He rounded on the genin as soon as he was sure they were out of earshot, his one eye nearly blazing with rage. How come you didn't kill him if you knew he wasn't dead? The boy returned his stare, his lips twisted in a slight sneer. Because, unlike you, thief, the man actually has honor. I know you were trying to copy my abilities while I was fighting. Don't you have any grace at all? Or do you always copy from your own comrades? The copy nin sputtered a little in rage at the accusation, while the blonde walked down to breakfast, pulling his doll off his head and securely placing it in his left arm. 3 hours later, outside, Kakashi had told them that he was going to train them so that they could fight Zabuza and his accomplice correctly. Naruto couldn't stop laughing at the exercise they were about to do. Tree walking. That's the foundation of all energy control, and the man was only now teaching it to them. He glared at the offender, finding it to be the one he despised the most, sensing that one of his students wasn't impressed by the feat of walking directly upward against the flow of gravity. He called down to him from upside down on the tree branch, deciding to remove the teen's non-existent smirk. Naruto, since you don't seem surprised at all, why don't you go first? With a mocking reply, the blonde simply laughed derisively. Certainly, Hatake-san. He walked slowly towards the tree, not pausing to gather his energy as he walked directly up the trunk, his pace never wavering as he went all the way to the top before back-flipping off the top and landing barefooted on the ground with barely a thud. Kakashi's glare became even more intense as he decided to carry out his plan. Can I speak with you for a moment, Naruto? As he followed his teacher out into the woods, the teen simply shrugged his shoulders, still clutching the cursed doll in one arm. The teacher rounded on him once they were out of sight or hearing range of his two teammates, and he could feel the arrogance and smugness emanating from the man. As your sensei, I command you to teach Sasuke your techniques. You have far too much power to be a genin, and Sasuke needs that power to exact his revenge on his brother. Naruto twitched his left brow once, twice, 3 times, before finally answering the man, a disbelieving look on his face. Do you really think that, if the council failed to order me to do so, that you would succeed? I will give you this one last warning, Hatake. Do not fuck with me, as I am not to be trifled with. To further prove his declaration, his leg shot out in a snap kick, which landed solidly on the Jounin's chest. The blow caused all air to rush out of his lungs, leaving him winded and gasping for breath, doubled over with his hands on his knees. The blonde disappeared off into the forest to do his own training, not to be seen for the rest of the week, much to Sasuke's and Kakashi's irritation. 6 days later, twilight in the forest. Naruto was currently sitting against a tree, eyes closed as he worked on trying to blend 2 elements together. He was almost succeeding, but something was missing. He was broken out of his meditation as he felt another person enter the clearing with the stealth of a shinobi. One purple eye opened slightly, so as to continue the illusion of being asleep. The intruder upon the clearing was a little shorter than him, and looked quite feminine. They were wearing a pink kimono, and held a basket on their left arm with a few herbs inside it. The figure had long, brown hair, and was currently approaching with their arm outstretched to gently shake him awake. His eyes snapped open completely before the person could touch him, causing them to back away in slight shock and fright. Sensing no inherent malice coming from the other person, he relaxed a little and tried to find out why the person seemed so familiar. Sorry about scaring you, but I don't like being touched. The woman nodded a little, her brown eyes sparkling in a bit of sadness and understanding. Naruto was confused at that part, and blinked a little in shock as she seemed to recollect some memory of a distant past. If her misty gaze into the air were any indication, her soft voice carried a hint of sadness before she snapped out of her daze. I understand. Sorry about waking you. Naruto shook his head slightly, before standing up with a stretch, his doll situated atop his head. Don't worry about it. I was awake by the time you entered the clearing. Why are you out here, anyway? The girl seemed to be slightly shocked that he was feigning sleep the entire time she saw him, before answering, one hand gesturing to the basket on her arm, and gathering medicinal herbs to help someone close to me. Would you like to help? The teen decided he might as well, as helping her might help him remember how he knew her. As he helped her gather different herbs to staunch bleeding, promote faster healing, and ease pain, he realized who she was. So, Hunter Nin-san, how's Zabuza-san doing? The girl stiffened and backed away, She hadn't brought any weapons with her when she had gone to collect herbs, and this boy was certainly terrifying in the power he wielded. She decided that, if he hadn't attacked her yet, she might have a chance. He's doing alright, though I am curious to know how you knew I was the hunter nin. The blonde gave a soft chuckle, pulling the doll off his head and setting it on the ground. The herbs you are collecting are the same ones I had to use back when I was training with my water manipulation. The bludgeoning force of water causes pain, as well as internal bleeding, and the needle trick you pulled would have put some heavy stress on the body. Would you mind if I accompanied you back to Zabuza-san? I wanted to thank him for providing a challenge for me, as I haven't had one in well over half a year. The woman nodded slightly, for fear that, should she refuse, the boy would attack her. She was considerably surprised when the doll lifted the basket's handle using its tails, and walked beside them as they headed towards their base. At her shocked and slightly curious stare, the teen decided he should give her a half-truth. Part of my bloodline allows me to animate inanimate objects. When I use stronger techniques, I use my doll to help me in my manipulation. Surely when you were watching the fight, you noticed how it moved. The woman nodded a bit, still curious about the plush toy. She gave him a slight smile, and decided that, since he told her about his bloodline, she might as well reciprocate. I see. My bloodline allows me to use Hyoten techniques. I've never heard of your kind of bloodline before, though. Is it rare? The blonde nodded slightly, before his lips twitched upward in a slight smile. I'm the last of my line, I believe. I've been trying to recreate fusion elements through my manipulation, like ice and wood, but something is missing about it. Perhaps, should we both live through this mission, you could give me a hint. The woman was a little shocked at that, as she didn't think anyone would be able to recreate her bloodline's ability. However, this boy seemed to be like her, almost. Before she could answer, she had to ask him another question, as they were within sight of the base by now. I'll think about it, but tell me, why do you fight? The boy's lips curled into a sad smile, startling both her and the doll, as the boy nearly never showed his real emotions. His voice had a haunted, faraway aspect to it. I fight for a promise I made to one who became my family. I promised her that I would take care of myself. The woman gave a sad nod, before replying. I fight for those that are precious to me. To protect my precious people, I will encase my heart in ice and become a true shinobi, should it be required. My name is Haku, by the way. The blonde gave her a slight smile, and nodded politely. Precious people, eh? My name is Naruto. Haku opened the door to Zabuza's room, to find Gato berating the man for not killing the bridge builder. The blonde skillfully hid himself in the room, using a complex weave of mana to seem to sink into the wall. In reality, he had simply disguised himself as the wall, letting light pass through him. After Gato tried to strike at Zabuza's supine form with his cane, which caused Haku to blur into action. Catching his wrist and snapping it like a twig, he left, calling out that they would pay for their insolence. Naruto had to stifle a snort at that, as the man's bodyguards were simply pseudo-samurai with no real abilities besides knowing how to use crude Batao jutsu. Zabuza finally took notice of the fox plush carrying the basket of herbs and spun his head around, looking for the blonde who owned said doll. The boy appeared from the wall, startling the recovering man, though he couldn't sense any ill intent from the boy. The blonde held out his hand in a peaceful gesture before speaking. I simply wanted to thank you for actually posing a challenge to me. It's been well over half a year since I had to go that far. Plus, I thought you had honor when you agreed to a water fight, instead of using your specialty of silent killing to try to blind me and assassinate me with your sword. The man grinned from the bed, showing off pointy teeth as the mask of bandages was absent, before replying. Sure thing, brat. Only Haku can usually keep up with me when I start to use water jutsus, though yours are considerably more destructive. The blonde gave a slight smirk at the description, before picking up his doll and handing the basket to Haku. He sat on the edge of the bed and scratched behind the fox's ears. I'm a destruction specialist, as I use wide-scale elemental techniques of all elements to overwhelm and destroy. Haku has real talent, though, but not on the battlefield. She seems a little too gentle for that. However, when I was training with my mentor a while back, she told me something that holds true to Haku. Anyone can destroy, but only truly skilled people can heal. At the time, I thought she was talking about the control required for the healing techniques, but I think now I realize what she meant. It's considerably easier to kill someone and not think twice about it than to heal the wounded. Haku smiled a little at this, and Zabuza seemed to think it over before nodding. The fox doll gave a toothy grin before speaking, which surprised both Zabuza and Haku. Took you long enough to figure that out, brat. The crazy bitch always was telling you stories about her friends, and it took you this long to realize what she was talking about. The blonde glared at the doll before retaliating. No more ear scratches until we're back in Konoha for that. Plus, you're not supposed to talk around other people. The fox doll looked absolutely stricken at the news, his normally menacing red eyes tearing up and widening into a kicked puppy look. His ears laid back against his head, and his tail seemed to droop. Haku almost squealed a kawaii at the scene, and Zabuza was intrigued. I noticed your doll could move, but I didn't know it could talk. Naruto scratched the side of his cheek sheepishly, while the doll was brokenly sobbing in Haku's arms. My doll has a soul, but since it's a Kyuubi doll, I normally won't let him talk as most of Konoha already wants to tear him limb from limb for just resembling the fox. If he were to speak, well, you know. The Kirinin snickered at that, as they both watched Haku squeeze the life out of the doll in a hug. Anyway, I came to tell you also that Hadake is trying to train my two teammates to get ready for a second battle, should you attack again. Though if he orders me to teach Uchiha-sama again, I swear I'll turn him into a statue. The man has absolutely no honor, as he tried to steal my techniques with his implanted eye while we were fighting. Thankfully, he was too busy staring at me to steal your jutsus. Zabuza was considerably shocked at this. What kind of teacher tries to go behind their back to steal their own students' techniques? He cracked a slight grin at the lack of respect for the jounin. His own respect for the famed copy nin taking a hit from the news. After bidding a fond farewell to Haku and Zabuza, Naruto headed back to Tezuna's house. Unfortunately, the two nins were still going to attack the bridge builder as it was their job. However, that didn't mean that, should they attack, that Naruto had to let them die. He cradled the traumatized fox doll in his arms, who was muttering about crazy ice bitches and killer hugs of doom, lightly scratching behind the doll's ears as he headed through the forest back to Tezuna's house. He entered without a sound, before going back to his still warded room and slipping in quietly. The next day, 8 a.m., Naruto awoke to a woman screaming, who sounded oddly like Tsunami. He hopped out of bed, slipping on an identical outfit almost absent-mindedly as he picked up the fox plush. He cradled it in one arm as he sprinted down the stairs and out the back door to see an odd sight. Inari, tears streaming down his face, was charging the two hired pseudo-samurai with nothing but a butcher knife as his protection. Tsunami was currently bound and gagged in between the two men as they leered predatorily at the approaching boy, hands on the sheaths of their swords. Naruto blinked a little at the suicidal boy, wondering if his mother meant so much to him that he'd lay down his life in a futile effort to free her. He gave a slight shrug before casting a spell that seemed fitting to the situation. Break. The single word caused all people to look towards him, his fox doll in hand as his arm was outstretched towards the two samurai. They were about to jeer at him about how his technique didn't work, before they noticed their arms and legs were stiffening. They looked at the boy in pure horror as they felt their entire bodies become stone, the sensation incredibly foreign and terrifying to the mercenaries. Inari and Tsunami just looked on in awe as the two men were petrified, before Tsunami shrieked in fear as Naruto gave both statues a swift kick, turning them to dust. He undid her bindings and gave her a slight smile, before disappearing in a swirl of water. Do not feel bad for them, as they deserved every moment of it. Be glad that they only suffered a small amount, for their crimes against the country were grave. Take care of Inari, Tsunami-san. At the bridge, Haku currently had Sasuke trapped within one of her personally created techniques, the Makaio Hayasho. She was currently reflecting from mirror to mirror, throwing volleys of needles at the boy, trying to avoid killing if she had to. Sekiro was protecting Tezuna, and Zabuza was hidden in the mist, fighting Zenbato against Kunai against Kakashi. Naruto arrived just as Haku had finally lost her temper at the Uchiha's arrogance, believing that he had won as soon as he had unlocked his Dijutsu. To prove him wrong, she threw needles into his neck, sending him into a near-death state. She wasn't quite ready to make her first kill, and she let her technique drop, watching Zabuza's fight with Kakashi. The blonde appeared next to her, looked at the body of Sasuke riddled with needles, and snickered. He bowed to Haku, stating in a mock-respective tone, "Haku Dono, I bow to your greatness at shutting up Uchiha-sama." The girl gave a soft laugh, before taking off her mask to continue watching Zabuza's fight. The Nuke Nin was currently winning, though he had a few wounds of his own. Kakashi had a spark of genius, and unrolled a summoning scroll, calling out his technique as he did hand seals and wiped his blood across the kanji. Kuchios, Daten, Tsuiga no Jutsu. Multiple summon nin dogs disappeared into the ground, before resurfacing underneath Zabuza's feet. They all piled onto him, biting deep into his arms and legs to immobilize him. Haku gave a slight start as she realized her mentor was in trouble, but Naruto held onto her shoulder firmly, his serious gaze looking slightly less grim due to the fact that he had a fox plush on the top of his head. Haku-san, please allow me the honors of screwing up this attempt on your mentor's life. If my senses are correct, Gato is actually heading this way with a large force of mercenaries, and I don't think they're for us. You need to be in top condition, just in case. With that said, the fox doll hopped down to the ground at the blonde's feet. He concentrated intensely as Kakashi bragged about his original technique, the air starting to swirl around the blonde as a violet aura erupted to life. He whispered a soft blizzaga before his eyes snapped open, the glittering purple orbs focusing intently on a spot just in front of Zabuza. The air chilled dangerously in that area, before ice crystals started to form at a rapid pace. Zabuza only had an instant to wonder if it was Haku protecting him before the crystals slammed into each other and exploded in growth, creating a 4-foot-thick block of blue ice, blocking Kakashi's piercing jab of the Chidori. The lightning faded from the copy hand, Nins as he searched for the source of the ice barrier. Before he could find the source, a sound of mocking clapping resounded through the mist, before Zabuza lifted it to see their audience. Gato, with about 300 mercenaries, stood at the end of the bridge and was sneering in his direction. The summoned nin dogs disappeared in a poof of gray smoke as a single senbon needle hit the summoning scroll, destroying the technique and releasing Haku's mentor. Zabuza stood and glared at the wealthy man, asking what he thought he was doing with a force like that. The arrogant little man replied that, since he and Haku weren't doing their jobs correctly, he was just going to kill them with the Konoha nins, using the mercenary force. Haku bristled at that, before teleporting to her mentor's side with an ice mirror, and running a quick healing technique to start to patch up his wounds. Zabuza looked to Kakashi, who was glaring at the ice wall, and simply stated that his mission was over, and that they didn't need to fight any longer. The man reluctantly nodded, more because he was tired and probably couldn't kill the nuke nin due to putting so much of his chakra into his attack. Naruto grinned and walked over beside them, the ice shattering and melting back into water before evaporating into the air. The Kyuubi doll was in his arms again as he spoke, shocking the three nins. I will take care of them. Kakashi, you go tend to Sasuke, as he's in a near-death state due to senbon needles, and Sakura's currently bawling her eyes out over his corpse. I also think she's going to try to embalm his body and keep it as some sort of souvenir, or something, so you might want to hurry. The Jounin looked up in shock and fear, before sprinting over to his student's side. Zabuza and Haku were snickering at the thought, and Naruto shocked both them and the doll in his arms. He gave them a true, warm smile, and extended a hand in a peaceful gesture towards them both. Allow me to do this, for while I'm not sure I quite get the concept, I do believe I want to protect you both. I suppose you could say you both have earned my respect, and have been added to my short list of precious people. Before waiting for a reply, he strode gracefully to the center of the bridge, about 30 feet away from the bloodthirsty mob of mercenaries. He set the toy down at his feet, and a dark purple aura flared to life around him. His hair started to rise from the energy gathered, billowing out behind him as the wind picked up. The mob of villagers who had come to the bridge, as well as Sakura, Kakashi, Zabuza, Haku, and the newly revived Sasuke looked on in awe at the sight, as the aura darkened more and started to glow brighter. The teen spoke, his voice a chilling monotone as he gazed in clear disdain at the mercenaries, before he raised his arms above his head. Your arrogance and greed sicken me. Prepare yourselves, for I will show no mercy. The greedy little midget laughed at this, asking what a girly boy would be able to do to him and his well-paid mercenaries. The doll came to life, its tails flicking to and fro in a hypnotic manner, though hidden to those behind the blonde due to the position of his feet. Most of the mercenaries stepped back in fear at the sight, however, but were unable to escape as a single word was murmured loud enough for all to hear, before both the blonde's arms descended. Ultima, the scenery descended into darkness for all, not just those caught by the spell. Odd flickers of light flashed brightly, before they condensed around the mob of mercenaries led by Gato. They formed a sphere, before condensing and brightening. Finally, an explosion of power erupted from the center, blinding everyone with a bright white light as shockwaves of energy ripped every last one of them apart before disintegrating the remains, and then the darkness receded. The bridge was, astonishingly enough, unharmed, though it was marred by the blood of hundreds having been spilled by the spell. All the onlookers had their jaws touching the floor from the raw destructive power of that one attack. Before the boy scooped up the plush doll and turned to face them, he gave a slight shrug and said they deserved it before walking off. The next day, they were just about ready to leave when Haku approached Naruto with a slight smile on her face and whispered in his ear, The blonde visibly brightened, and actually gave the woman a hug, nearly scaring the poor doll on his head out of his wits. The ice user then teleported away through an ice mirror, and left with Zabuza to continue wandering. When questioned later, the blonde would say she gave me a hint on something. On the way back to Konoha, however, they ran into a bit of trouble, as they stepped out into the same clearing that Naruto and Zabuza ravaged in their water fight. Two presences made themselves known by stepping out of the tree line. One was a rather tall, bulky shark-like man, with blue-tinged skin, dark blue hair, gill markings on his face, and a bandaged object on his back. He also had a slashed mist. Hidaite II, however, was quite recognizable. He was shorter than his companion by about a head, yet carried himself with grace and an air of indifference. His hair was long and black, tied back in a ponytail falling in between his shoulder blades. He had two markings on either sides of his nose, like diagonal slashes. They looked, oddly enough, like bags under his eyes. What really sparked the familiarity were two red eyes, each with three tomos spinning around them in a hypnotic manner. The Konoha Hidaite was what sealed the deal. This man was Uchiha Itachi. The two both had bamboo hats with strips of cloth dangling from them in their hands, bells tied to the ends of the cloth jingling a little with each movement. Naruto, seeing a chance to forever piss off his teammate, and possibly find out what 2S class Nuke Nin wanted at the same time, decided to do something he would never have even dreamed of in a normal situation. He looked at Itachi, who stared emotionlessly back, before looking at Sasuke. He then struck a thinking pose, with the doll situated on his head. Quickly drumming up his courage, he did the unthinkable. He squealed in a perfect imitation of a fangirl, causing everyone to look at him like he lost his mind. He quickly schooled his face into that of a love-struck fangirl, and turned to Sasuke, stars in his eyes. "You never told me you had an evil older brother." This, of course, caused Sasuke to break out of his shock and yell "Itachi," before charging his elder brother, who simply backhanded him across the face without even looking, knocking him out and slamming him into a tree. Kakashi, worried about the Uchiha heir's health, rushed to his side, along with Sakura. Naruto regained his composure, though the doll on his head had to be moved to his arms to stifle the hilarious laughter emanating from it. Naruto walked forward slowly and nodded politely to them both. "So, I'm guessing you two needed something with me. By the cloaks with the pretty red clouds, I suppose you're Akatsuki." They both nodded, a little shocked and afraid of his rapid mood swing, and Itachi was having issues repressing his fangirl sense, as the blonde had dredged up bad memories. As his team was currently indisposed with caring for a knocked-out Sasuke, he shrugged and asked the obvious question. "What do you need?" Itachi was the one who spoke, stepping forward a little and settling his unnerving gaze on Naruto's purple eyes. His voice was soft, but carried a tone of authority to it. "We need you to come with us, Naruto-kun, as we are interested in your biju." The blonde lifted one eyebrow, before holding the plush toy out in his hands. Itachi looked at it for a second, before lifting his own eyebrow in silent question. Naruto decided to elaborate for the slightly confused elder Uchiha. "I had him sealed into this doll when I was 3. If you're going to take him somewhere, I'm coming with you. He gets pissed when I'm not there, as I control his Yauki usage." Kusama started to snicker at this, and Itachi's lips started to twitch as if he wanted to laugh. The plush doll, however, didn't find this funny at all, and flicked his fluffy tails in agitation. "There's no way I'm going anywhere without the brat. I'm having too much fun being his weapon of mass destruction. Damn it." Kusama looked over at Itachi, barely muffling his laughter at the great Kyuubi no Kitsune sealed into a squishy plush toy. Itachi looked back at him and nodded before turning back to Naruto. "We may have to come back after speaking to our leader about this. He may want you to join Akatsuki. We only wanted the power of the bijus by extracting them from the Jinchuriki, but since yours is sealed in this doll, I suppose we could maybe use you as a member, provided you wish to join." The blonde cradled the doll in his arm for a moment, before placing it back on his head and tapping his chin. His answer, however, caused Kusama to fall flat on his face. "Will I get to wear an awesome hat like yours, and maybe get a smaller one made for Kyuubi?" Itachi actually seemed to smirk at this, before nodding. He then said, "Come, Kusama," before they both disappeared in a puff of black smoke. By now, Kakashi and Sakura had ascertained that Sasuke was going to be alright, and came back into the clearing, unconscious boy cradled in Kakashi's arms. At Kakashi's question of where did they go, Naruto just shrugged and said dunno. The gray-haired man didn't think to question the blonde further, and started off at a faster pace to Konoha to get Uchiha-sama to a hospital. Naruto jumped to the trees, taking the faster route to Konoha, as he held an in-depth discussion with his doll. They both reached a decision, just as they came through Konoha's gates. He disappeared in a swirl of lightning, shocking all the villagers nearby who never saw a shunshin like that, and further scaring them when it echoed in a resounding boom of thunder. In the Hokage's office, Naruto had appeared while the Hokage was just about to take a paper off the top of the stack of his paperwork, and the lightning elemental Shunshin's thunder caused him to stumble, knocking the stack over onto the floor. The aged man glared heavily at the evil paper before addressing the boy in his office. "Naruto-kun, you're back early. Was there something wrong with the mission?" The blonde shook his head and told the Sandaime all about the mission, including that they encountered 2 Akatsuki members who wanted to take him away, before making up some story that he had distracted them. It was a half-truth, damn it. The aged man bought it, however, and adopted a grim look on his face. "This is grave news indeed." Naruto adopted an exaggerated thinking pose, before seeming to wonder aloud. "I dunno, I may have to ask about joining them. They have these awesome hats." The Hokage, nicknamed God of Shinobi, and the professor, fainted. Naruto had reached a point of no return. He was going to do something so dangerous, so risky, that not even the Hokage would consider it a mission. Many shinobi have requested it as a mission when they are suicidal, and not even the Hokage would subject them to the fate of those who failed. Instead, he dispatched them on standard high-profile assassination missions, knowing that their deaths would make the target more arrogant about their bodyguard system, making them more vulnerable to real assassinations. The mission Naruto had in mind would shake Orochimaru to his core because it seemed impossible and daunting. The man invented a possible method of immortality, but this was too much even for him. He intended to discover what Kakashi's face looked like. If Naruto's theory is correct, this would be the pinnacle of blackmail. He reasoned that either his Hatake's face looked fantastic and he could threaten to spread the photos around, or the man looked hideous behind that blue face mask and didn't want to be ashamed of his appearance. His final theory, while plausible, was highly improbable. Maybe the man had an extremely unmanly tattoo on his face. That goddamn mask was going to come off in any case. After relaying his mission to his doll, the plush's eyes widened and he mumbled, "You're too young to die," before yelling at him in his own home. "I'm Kyuubi no Kitsune, and even I'm scared of the consequences of failing that mission." The black mage gave a solemn nod before making one of the most potentially suicidal decisions of his life, with an even higher fatality risk than impersonating Uchiha Itachi at the annual Fan People Convention, which was held in Wave Country. Those fiends would tear you apart just to get a piece of Itachi. He'd heard that someone made a fortune by stealing a hair from his brow before, and he shuddered to think what vital organs would fetch. "I don't care, I'll finish this mission and live to tell the tale. That man's face will be revealed." And so began what would become known throughout the elemental countries as the time when a 15-year-old genin defied fate by attempting the SSS-class mission of unmasking Hatake Kakashi. He quickly packed a bag with everything he needed for this mission, including clothing, a high-definition camera, and his plush toy, which was securely strapped to his head. He tied back his bright blonde hair and used raw mana manipulation to change the color to a dull black that seemed to absorb all light. He was completely prepared, but Kyuubi was gnawing on his stuffed fingernails in fear of what would happen if they failed. Before they left, he wanted to get something off his chest. "If anything happens to you, I want you to know that you're like the son, apprentice, sibling I never had, and I'm proud that you inherited my sadism and fighting spirit. I also want you to tell Lulu that I hate her for calling me fluffy, but I love her for giving you weapons of mass destruction, including mine, at your fingertips." The black mage was taken aback by his doll's fear and gave the fox a few belly scratches. He paused before shrugging, deciding that if he was captured or failed this mission, he was probably going to die anyway, so he might as well say it. He responded with a warm smile to the doll. "Kyuubi-kun, I wanted to tell you that I'm glad I had a companion like you for most of my life. You're the best doll I could have wished for, and I'm actually quite glad you were sealed inside me. Otherwise, I might have succumbed to the lies and deception of this village, and become yet another mindless drone willing to throw their lives away for the decrepit council." After that, he gave the fox doll a reassuring hug before leaving. He vowed to complete the mission and return alive. Konoha Avenues. Nobody noticed a flicker of black as it moved through the crowd, hopping from shadow to avoid being noticed. Every now and then, a speck of red or purple would appear alongside the black, but it would vanish as quickly as it appeared. The figure was searching everywhere for the elusive Jounin, whom he was certain had the day off, and he was determined to find him. He searched high and low, near and far, and even through the Hokage Tower before asking the elderly man where he could find Hatake. Before he elaborated, the Hokage gave him a puzzled look. I'm determined to see beneath that mask, which rumor has it that not even Hyugas can see through. Before breaking the silence, Sarutobai's eyes widened in shock. Are you insane? Nobody ever returned alive and unscathed from those missions. They all failed horribly. The black mage nodded, determination shining through his strange eyes. I know and I'm well aware, but I'm confident that I will be the one to discover what's beneath that mask, if only to blackmail the Jounin. Sarutobai sighed tiredly, knowing he couldn't persuade the blonde, temporarily raven-haired teen. His mind raced on the subject as he seemed to age decades as he pondered what to do before nodding, mostly to himself. You can usually find him at the memorial stone. Naruto gave the man a slight salute before vanishing into the black void, leaving no trace behind. The Sandaime leaned back in his chair, praying for the young man who appeared to be doomed. His reverent silence was broken by a thought that startled him. What am I going to tell Jiraiya when he asks where Naruto is so he can train him? My student cannot train someone who is no longer alive. This means even more paperwork. At the memorial, the black mage landed silently on a tree branch, keeping a wary eye on his gray-haired sensei. If he didn't have that retarded grudge against him, the man wouldn't be so bad. Well, that's not entirely true, because he was still a hypocrite who didn't follow his own saying of those who break the rules are trash. But those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash. And he was a dishonorable thief. Wasn't he rivals with Mato Guy, the Taijutsu specialist? He shuddered at the thought of how many Taijutsu styles he'd learned inexplicably quickly from sparring matches with the eccentric spandex-loving Jounin over the course of his career. Poor guy, even his extreme youthfulness cannot save him from the Sharingan. Did I just call that youthfulness? Fuck, I need to stop hanging out with Konoha because the spandex virus is infecting me. He shuddered violently as he imagined himself in green spandex, before a devilish glint lit up his eyes, as he whispered conspiratorially with his plush toy, whose eyes widened in the sheer deviance of what the teen was saying. He kept his voice as a soft murmur. As they refined their mission objectives and disappeared to make accommodations, the fox broke out into a maniacal grin, his tails twitching in anticipation. Guy's residence. Naruto discovered that disabling the traps and alarm systems in Guy's apartment was actually quite simple, assuming that the man didn't have many enemies out to kill him. Or, more likely, they were afraid of his living quarters if his eccentricities were any indication of how his entire life would be. The Taijutsu master had a rather odd internal designer. More than likely, the man declared that having an internal designer was unyouthful, and did everything himself. His apartment walls were painted the same shade of green as his spandex suit, and there were hundreds of weights stacked all around the walls in varying densities, ranging from a tiny weight that weighed 40 pounds, obviously to slip into a weight belt, to weights designed for lifting, which were a little less dense than the tinier ones. A bookshelf held a few books, mostly on muscle training theory or taijutsu exercises. A stack of papers and a reading light were on top of a desk. He walked over in silence, reading the title and realizing Guy was actually writing a book. A training manual, to be precise, on the uses of the celestial gates, as well as their advantages and disadvantages. However, it suggested wearing a green spandex bodysuit all the time as one of the precursors to the training regime. And the title was a little off. Mato Guy's You and Your Youthfulness, a guide to the springtime of youth using the celestial body gates. The doll on his head shuddered as he considered all the impressionable children who could be harmed by this work in progress. Naruto, on the other hand, thought it was a rather nice gesture by the man, albeit done a little oddly. If all these detailed notes on how each and every gate affects someone meant anything, he obviously knew a lot about what he was doing. He shrugged it off, thinking the shiny bowl-cut, green spandex suit and incredibly sparkly teeth were just a quirk of the Taijutsu master. Most Jounins were dealing with the stress of killing people for money in some way, and he couldn't blame them for how they chose to express it. He continued his search until he came across the man's closet. He opened the door with trepidation, almost fearful of what might be hidden inside. He almost fell to the floor in awe of what he saw after fully opening the door. Guy was dressed normally, not just any ordinary clothing, but fashionable everyday wear. Sure, there were 4 spandex bodysuits, as the man obviously had great hygiene, but the rest of the closet was packed with great clothes. The doll actually fell off his head in awe of the spectacle, but he was able to catch it before he hit the floor. He quickly decided that his admiration for the spandex-clad Jounin had grown several notches, and he crossed off one of the routes to carry out his new plan with Hatake. He refused to steal from this man because he obviously had some sort of dignity because he was dressed normally. He had great pride in his work and wanted to pass it on to others who couldn't be taught manually. And see damn, he wanted to learn how to make his teeth that shiny. He made his way to Training Ground 27, where he knew Team 9 was training, with the intention of asking the Jounin a few questions. Around 11 AM on Training Ground 27, Naruto appeared within a snowstorm, shocking the ninja team present. After being given the hint by Haku, he worked on his ice manipulation and was able to make a shunshin out of it, much to his delight. A little known fact about Naruto is that he adores his various teleportation techniques and constantly strives to invent new ones to counteract the standard smoke or swirl of leaves that everyone else in Konoha uses. Guy was wary of the newcomer because Naruto had dropped the mono weave over his hair after changing his mind about stealing from the spandex Jounin. The Taijutsu master had heard about Kakashi's eccentric student from his eternal rival, but hearing and seeing are two different things. To begin with, the boy was obviously quite advanced, as he not only had a flawless shunshin, but he could also interchange elemental effects with it. The boy also demonstrated exceptional control, as well as multiple elemental affinities, and demonstrated that he was completely unbiased and reactionary in all situations in which he was placed. He decided to give the teen the benefit of the doubt and ignored the fox plush doll on his head, having witnessed stranger things during his time as a ninja. Tenten, the weapons mistress, was fascinated by the newcomer. She'd heard from a few loose-tongued ninja around the village that there was a blonde-haired demon walking around, but she couldn't see anything wrong with Yamanaka Ino, so this was the only other person with blonde hair in the village, aside from the Yamanaka clan. Her incredible eyesight took in almost unnoticeable details as she inspected him. If the toned stomach was any indication, the teen was in good shape, though he lacked the bulk, as she referred to it, of her teammate Lee or her sensei, Guy. His muscles were lean and wiry, allowing him to move with agility and evasion, as well as engage in precision-based combat rather than heavy hand-to-hand combat. His golden blonde hair appeared to be not uncared for, but not at the top of his priority list. She was perplexed as to why he kept his hair at that length if he had long hair, but didn't worship it like others do. As she continued her observation, she pushed that thought to the side. The blonde's eyes were the strangest shade of purple she'd ever seen, and she'd seen strange shades of purple before. Her teammate, Hyuga Neji, had nearly white-purple eyes, and the Hyuga clan as a whole had lavender eyes. This teen's eyes were a jewel-like shade of amethyst, and she appeared to be shielded from the outside world. He had no emotion on his noble-looking face, but he didn't exude superiority like the Uchiha or Hyuga. He simply appeared neutral. His clothing was strange, with wide, flowing sleeves that exposed his stomach and shinobi pants that rode low on his hips. But she was used to strange clothing. Her gaze was also drawn to the Kyuubi doll perched atop his head, which she could have sworn smiled at her when she finished her inspection. But she convinced herself it was just a doll. Lee had a grin worthy of Guy, wondering how this newcomer could appear without even a hint of his approach, which should have made him very wary. However, he only saw it as a possible sparring partner. Neji glared at the teen, his inner Neji screaming inside his head about how he spent so much time making his dark brown hair silky and shiny. But this newcomer had even better hair than he did. He was about to enter his brooding mode, his angst levels clearly exceeding those of the previous Uchiha, when he realized the boy didn't even seem to care about his own appearance, as if his hair was just naturally perfect. This, of course, caused his angst levels to skyrocket, causing the grass around him to wilt and decay. Breaking the awkward silence, Naruto decided to be polite and not blunt for once, as he was still unsure if his respect for the green-clad Jounin was properly placed. "Hello, Guy-san. Please forgive my sudden intrusion, but since Hatake-san seems to be busy either brooding over the memorial stone or training the Uchiha when he thinks no one is looking, I was wondering if I could observe how a real team interacts. I arrived in Konoha on the day of the Genin exam, and, though I am a newcomer, I am quite certain my team is not exactly satisfactory in teamwork." Guy was surprised, because the stories he had heard from Kakashi always described the teen as a wolf in sheep's skin. The gray-haired Jounin was certain that his student's animated doll was the Kyuubi, or that he was the Kyuubi. Speaking of the doll, it was noticeably inanimate at the moment, and he was curious how the blonde manipulated it, wondering if it was a form of Kagetsu. The Jounin nodded slightly before responding, adopting a rare serious expression. "Sure, Naruto-san, but may I ask you a question first?" Only Guy and Tenten's eyes caught the movement on the normally immobile man's face when the blonde gave him a slight twitch of his lips. Using their knowledge of Neji, a stoic yet arrogant Hyuga, they realized the blonde gave the impression of acceptance. Before they could think any further, the enigmatic teen had responded. "Of course, Guy-san, what exactly do you want to know?" Jounin, dressed in spandex, tried to come up with a question that wasn't too blunt or biased. He eventually decided that he should just ask the question plainly, having the impression that the teen's mind tended to rip apart what people said to find exactly what they were asking regardless. I've heard stories about how you fight, and I was wondering if it was true that you animate your doll, and if so, how you do it. From what Kakashi said, it seemed as if there were no chakra strings to be a Kagutsu, which makes it quite an interesting ability. Tenten, Lee, and Neji were taken aback, and the doll on the boy's head seemed to applaud the Jounin. The blonde took a slight pause, as if deciding whether or not to respond. Finally deciding that the green-clad man had done nothing to irritate him, he gave him the same response he gave Haku. I have a rare bloodline that grants me extreme elemental control as well as the ability to animate inanimate objects. Unfortunately for Hatake-san, his Sharingan was unable to copy any of my abilities when he decided to inspect them without my knowledge while I was engaged in a water battle with a nuke nin on our C-rank mission. Guy was skeptical of this ability because he wasn't just a taijutsu fanatic. When he was researching ancient taijutsu styles, he came across stories about a fabled group of warriors who used elemental techniques without hand seals and tended to use something to help channel their energy. They mostly used staves, rods, or dolls. He was also astounded by his eternal rival's lack of honor in attempting to steal techniques from one of his own students. While his 3 students were shocked by the boy's bloodline, he decided to ask another question before forming an opinion. Naruto-san, would you be willing to spar with me so that I can see how this bloodline works in battle? I have to admit that it piqued my interest, and it would be beneficial for my students to increase their youthfulness while watching such an interesting fighting style. The spandex man's serious expression seemed to slip a little at the end, causing Naruto's lips to twitch once more. If Guy's eyes were correct, the doll on his head appeared to be holding back a snicker. The blonde tapped his chin with her index finger before removing the doll from his head and placing it on the ground, where it stood motionless. Hand to hand, doll to hand, or full-on combat, Guy-san. The Jounin, seeing an opportunity to examine each aspect of the alleged bloodline, chose a hidden option. How about hand-to-hand first, then doll-to-hand, and then all-out combat? Most people with bloodlines will focus solely on the bloodline abilities and neglect their other talents. And if your bloodline is what you say it is, I would expect you to be a little shoddy with your taijutsu, and perhaps I could help you with it. Naruto smiled slightly as he realized what the Jounin was up to. The strange man seemed to have a sense of who he was, and he had to admit his respect grew as a result of his observation. He wondered where he had obtained the information. But if he was correct, the man must have attempted to revive ancient taijutsu styles, and may have encountered black mages mentioned in history. He politely nodded his head and assumed a stance, which he recognized from the man's slight widening of his eyes. Guy is well aware of it. It was a truly ancient hand-to-hand style, the name of which had been lost to history, and he had been studying it for the past few months because its potential was enormous. It included agility, evasion, deflection, and precise strikes designed to aggravate and cripple opponents. It required so much training and flexibility that it was nearly impossible to replicate. But it was quite effective against Sharingan users because they couldn't fight your style with the same style unless they wanted to hurt themselves in the process. Guy assumed his Goken stance, and his Genin team made their way to the trees. They stood there for what seemed like hours before a single leaf fluttered from a tree, and they took action. Sensing that it wasn't needed right now, the doll hopped up into the trees with the Genin team, scaring them a little, and hopped into Tenten's lap, watching the fight. Guy was taken aback because the boy appeared to have been practicing this style for over a decade, as he fluidly dodged, deflected, and blocked his powerful kicks and punches. The boy's sheer flexibility surprised him, as it matched even the body augmentations used by Orochimaru, despite the fact that he was certain the boy had nothing of the sort done to him. He almost marveled at the boy's flexibility as he twisted his spine at an unnatural angle, dodging a kick to his midsection and delivering swift jabs to the insides of his thighs and the sides of his knees in turn. Guy, on the other hand, wasn't a Jounin for nothing, and he was able to quickly slam the lancing pain that was attempting to disorient him out of his mind while concentrating on getting a good spar out of this. The two continued their taijutsu sparring for about 10 minutes, each giving their all but not going too far. Guy didn't remove his weights or open the gates because it was just a spar to compare styles. If he had, he would have won solely on the basis of his superior knowledge of taijutsu. They parted ways, breathing lightly. Guy had some swiftly purpling bruises from the black mage's accurate strikes, while the blonde had a cracked rib or two, as well as quite a few bruises of his own, much larger than Guy's. The doll jumped out of Tenten's lap and into Naruto's arms, who seemed strangely pleased to have a fight. Guy was the first to speak, his serious exterior crumbling beneath the joy of discovering someone who had successfully revived such an ancient style. YOSH. Naruto-kun, your youth shines brightly. I've only heard legends of that style, and that it was extremely dangerous to train in. How did you manage to use that style to its full potential? The blonde's stoic demeanor softened slightly, and a sad smile tugged at the edges of his lips, surprising onlookers. I was taught by my caretaker and mentor from the age of 3 to 14, and she insisted that, because my bloodline is range-oriented, I have a solid foundation in evading hand-to-hand combat, while also ensuring that I am well defended if I am unable to escape close range. Guy nodded his head slightly, his youth slipping back into the next place as he became enthralled by this fight. She must have been a young lady, Naruto-kun. YOSH. On to the next part. Doll-to-hand combat. Send it at me with all your might, Naruto-kun. The spandex-clad Jounin swears he saw a malicious smirk emanating from the doll, and the blonde nods, his indifferent demeanor returning. Behind Naruto, a pale violet aura flickered to life as he backflipped away, dropping the doll in mid-air. The doll came to life, sprinting towards Guy at near Jounin level speeds and slightly shocking the man. He began to dodge as many attacks as he could, dishing out a few kicks when he could, though the 9 tails and sharp plush teeth left very few gaps in the offense. Each of the tails caused crater-like dents in the ground, shocking everyone except Naruto, and the doll itself with the power contained within the doll and causing the Jounin to be wary of it. Naruto was wondering if he could give the Jounin a better fight with the doll now that Kyuubi was fully in control of his own movement for the fight. It was quite small, too small to fight effectively, and the man obviously wanted to see how the doll could fight. He paused for a moment before grinning as he remembered something he had heard from Lulu during their training. The only limitations to black magic are those of your imagination. However, black magic cannot enter the realm of healing because it is governed by white magic. There is no black magic spell that can heal you, but the possibilities are limitless. When creating your own spells, you must first consider what you want them to accomplish before opening your mind to the possibilities. Allow your instinct to guide you, but make sure that you can also guide your instinct. He began to meditate for a moment before the answer came to him. The violet aura flared to life around him, darkening slightly as he began to conjure the spell. Guy noticed this and wondered what the boy was doing when the doll froze in place. Kyuubi had come to a halt as the spell began to affect him, wondering what the boy was up to now. He realized as the ground accelerated away from his muzzle. The boy was forcing him to grow in order to give his opponent an advantage. He almost laughed in delight at this, because he never liked having an unfair advantage, his attack on Konoha being an exception. The doll was now about 4 feet tall, 5 feet from nose to tail base, and 6 feet long on each side. The observing genins, as well as Guy, were taken aback. Naruto might have cackled with delight at how his spell worked before speaking loud enough for Team 9 to hear him. I felt that the doll's small stature gave me an unfair advantage, Guy-san, so I decided to try to increase its size. However, it will be more powerful at the expense of the small target and nimble efficiency it had before. The Jounin nodded, slightly impressed by the teen's abilities, before continuing the fight. The doll was much stronger than before, with the slight dents in the ground transforming into full craters and trees nearly splintering under the might of the tails whipping towards him. One of the obvious disadvantages of fighting a doll was that it wasn't human. It didn't tire, it didn't feel pain, and, most importantly, it didn't have any bones to break, which was one of Goken's main advantages. Goken focuses on bludgeoning force, snapping bones beneath their strong strikes, and causing physical damage to their opponent. It was useless against a doll. 5 minutes later, a heavily breathing Guy called for a halt, and Naruto motioned for the doll to approach him. The fox plush, despite its size, appears to have a soft spot for ear scratches, as the fox's tails began to twitch side to side in delight as Naruto busied himself with scratching while Guy regained his breath. It took about 10 minutes for the man to catch his breath, and the doll was safely returned to Naruto's arms in its smaller form. The Jounin was both excited and terrified of what the boy would be like in all-out combat. The boy was clearly at least Jounin in strength, despite the fact that Kakashi had not taught him or even attempted to teach him. He was disappointed in his rival for allowing such a prized student to slip through his grasp. His genin were wide-eyed in surprise and awe of the genin who had to be only a year their junior. He demonstrated his ability in taijutsu, and his doll could easily fight on par with Guy while still wearing his weights. And that was only one aspect of his bloodline. He had claimed to have extreme control over all the elements, and they were both scared and excited to see what happened next. Naruto, deciding that the man deserved his respect, spoke up politely in a softly amused tone. Guy-san, if we continue, I'm afraid I won't be able to save this training area. Because of my elemental manipulation, I specialize in wide-scale demolition. If Hadake-san told you anything about our encounters during the C-rank mission, surely he told you what happened when I was faced with opponents. The Jounin blinked briefly before widening his eyes in recollection. Kakashi had said that his blonde student was a demon on the battlefield, with abilities that were nothing short of cage-level destruction. He claimed that the blonde had wiped out an entire army of mercenaries, as well as their leader, with a single technique. He reasoned that discretion was the better part of valor and wondered if he could possibly compromise. You have a point, Naruto-san. Would it be possible for you to show some of your techniques, though? I haven't seen anyone able to accomplish much with pure elemental manipulation alone. You have a point, Naruto-san. Would it be possible for you to show some of your techniques, though? I haven't seen anyone able to accomplish much with pure elemental manipulation alone. The blonde considered it for a moment before nodding and asking a question. Small explosions, larger devastation, or widespread devastation? Guy considered it for a moment before nodding to himself. The best you have, to a point, because I don't want to destroy this training ground. The black mage's purple eyes twinkled with impish delight as he gave a decisive nod, dropping the toy in front of him. For a brief moment, a dark purple power surged and flickered around him as he raised a single hand into the air. The doll's tails came to life, hypnotically flicking side to side. Before the results were shown, the teen spoke up and described his technique. Waterja, a massive globe of water erupted above the training area, easily 50 feet in diameter. It hovered for a moment before twisting and twining into a 100-foot-long water dragon, twisting through the air and knocking a few trees over with slight flicks of its tail. As Naruto snapped his fingers, the near maroon aura flared into existence for a brief moment. The doll's tail slammed downward in front of it but did not harm the ground. Before the water changed again, another word slipped into the air. Blizzardja. The water dragon exploded into a shower of rain before freezing into hundreds of thousands of ice needles that landed silently on the training area's earth, demonstrating how sharp they were to slip in without much resistance. They all slipped back out, leaving tiny pinpricks in their wake, before colliding and forming a large prism of ice that hovered in the air before falling to the ground. The area around the prism flash froze, turning the grass to ice, before exploding into a shower of glass-like shards, dissolving into the air as the grass thawed. Naruto smiled wistfully, recalling Haku's ability and her subsequent hint of unlocking fusion elements. He moved on to the next element quickly, clearly aware that there were two more observers hidden in the trees. He felt no malice from them and let them continue to watch as he lifted both arms above his head, the doll mimicking his movements with its tails. As he brought both arms together in a vicious downward motion, the purple aura reappeared, darkened slightly more before dissipating. The word that came out of his mouth was nearly lost in the effects that followed it. Thundaja. 15 lightning bolts, each easily 2 feet thick, collided over 30 feet above their heads before combining and slamming into the earth below them, the white beam of energy easily 10 feet across and a foot or two thick. He reduced the electrical charge that escaped the ground so that no one received more than a minor shock. But the ground was unable to contain it all and exploded where it was struck. In the aftermath of the lightning strike, the leaves in the trees trembled with an echoing boom. He moved on to the next spell without missing a beat, turning to an unoccupied grove of trees before delivering a swift palm thrust, accentuated by the movements of his doll and his mana briefly coming to life. Eroja. Wind gusts shredded well over 50 trees into sand, the poor bark never standing a chance against the incredibly precise blades of wind hidden within the storming gale that completely surrounded the trees. He released his second-to-last elemental spell, aiming for a location that wouldn't be too destructive, the purple aura remaining after this one as he really needed the power for the last. Faraja. The sky combusted into a brilliant explosion of white-hot fire over 100 feet above them in the air, spreading easily at least 30 feet in every direction before imploding on itself, as he didn't want the forest to catch fire. The purple aura twisted and twined around him, and he raised both hands before slamming them to the ground, the doll mimicking every movement. Quakeja. In response to the spell, the earth groaned and cracked, and hundreds of thousands of branching spears of earth erupted from the ground. They only stayed for a moment before disappearing, and the earth returned to how it was before the sparring began. With all the craters and dents filled from the spell's increased power, the black mage turned to face the shell-shocked green Jounin, his doll smirking at the two unnoticed others hidden among the trees before leaping into the blonde's arms. Before asking his question, the teen raised an elegant blonde eyebrow, unfazed by his inhuman display. Is that all you needed to see? I can do a few more things, but I'd rather not. Not even my earth manipulation can undo the damage done by the ability I used at the end of my C rank. It's difficult enough to keep that technique contained and not allowing it to affect anything that isn't caught in it. And the poor trees have suffered enough today. Guy nodded slightly, his 3 genin almost falling out of the tree in awe of the incredible power displayed. The Jounin was relieved that he didn't fight the boy in all-out combat, as the boy's abilities were quite destructive. When he said he specialized in widespread demolition, he wasn't kidding. The 2 bystanders nodded to each other before disappearing, still unnoticed by everyone except Naruto. The blonde struck an elaborate thinking pose, the doll hopping to his head and lying motionless there, before asking a question that had the genin team falling out of the tree and flat on their faces. I also wanted to ask where you got your spandex suits, because I believe Hatake-san could benefit from the youthfulness that they provide. I also wish to deprive him of his mask and bear witness to the mystery of the world known as Hatake Kakashi's face, if only to serve as blackmail material should he try to set me up with a potentially fatal enemy again. Guy was once again astounded by his rival's unyouthfulness, all for the sake of a simple grudge. He was attempting to assassinate his own student. He was terrified because he couldn't detect a lie from the blonde young man. It meant that his rival was truly blinded by unjustified hatred and anger toward this boy over nothing, and was using his position as the blonde's sensei to try to get him killed. The eternal rivalry between Guy and Kakashi came to an end at that point, as the guy in green discovered that the rival he had been competing against had indeed fallen from grace. Guy informed the blonde of the location of the store that sold the spandex bodysuits he always wore, as well as politely asking the boy if he would mind stopping by his apartment sometime to discuss his hand-to-hand style, as Guy was incredibly interested in it and would like to write down how to properly train a person in the style. Naruto nodded to the taijutsu master, his lips quirking upwards in the shape of a slight smile. Despite his exuberance and youthfulness, he didn't mind the man all that much. The man was honorable, adhered to a strict moral code, and would not use the knowledge gained from the black mage for selfish purposes. Naruto sat against the trunk of a tree that hadn't been felled and listened to Guy's lesson plan. Now that he knew where he could buy spandex, he could wait a little longer to remove Kakashi's mask. He was really interested in Kakashi's teamwork theory, right before he pandered to Sasuke's every whim and ignored both him and Sakura. He watched as Team 9 practiced under Guy's watchful eye, surprised at what they were capable of. When the Hyuga turned on his Byakugan, he had to put up with Neji's curious, yet still haughty, gaze because he couldn't see Naruto's chakra coils, or any chakra at all, as well as the red energy that seemed to be stored within the doll on his head. Naruto simply shrugged his shoulders and made the ultimate excuse of excuses. It's a bloodline thing. Normally, they'd buy it, but Guy appeared suspicious and thoughtful. While they were practicing and training, Naruto would play a little with Kyuubi, doing his own unique training. It nearly gave Neji a heart attack to see a 1/10 scale model of himself, shiny hair and all, created as an earth golem. Tenten thought it was cute and glomped it, slightly squealing. Naruto knew not to say anything because he was convinced she was hiding pointy objects somewhere, ready to throw them at anyone who dared to call her a fangirl. Lee, on the other hand, thought it was youthful when he finally set up his little training playground in front of him and the Kyuubi toy. There were 4 figures, each doing something different and made of a different element that matched their personalities. Neji was an earth golem because he was cold, unforgiving, unmovable in his beliefs, and stoic. Tenten was piercing, striking with deadly accuracy, and had a bipolar personality. In a fight, she was focused and unflinching, but off the battlefield, she was slightly bubbly and humble, so she was lightning. Lee was vivacious, always here or there but never for long. Goken's fighting style was based on straightforward strikes, but he mixed in some acrobatics to gradually mold the style to fit him and his personality. He was a golem of the wind. Then there was Guy. In a different way, he appeared to be bipolar. On and off the field, he was youthful and exuberant, but when confronted with something potentially threatening or something piqued his interest, he became serious and focused. He molded his students into powerful shinobi while keeping their opposing viewpoints from causing much infighting. He was gentle when necessary, but incredibly powerful when the situation demanded it. He was a golem made of water, The Lee and Neji golems sparred in perfect imitations of their taijutsu styles, with the Guy golem yelling in grand imitation of the instructor for the Tenten golem to improve their evasion by throwing projectiles at them. He wanted her to miss by 1 centimeter if they couldn't move out of the way, and the Tenten golem delivered. Guy had come over to inspect the simulated battlefield and was astounded by how accurate everything was. When he asked what Naruto was up to, the boy gave him an interesting answer. Well, in my spare time, I work on not only my control, so that I can use my ultimate technique without harming anything I don't want to, but I also work on fusion between elements. You saw a glimpse of that when I showed you each of my elements, as I had gotten a hint from a powerful woman with the Hyoten bloodline on how to mix wind and water to create ice. It also helps that I have a photographic memory, which allows me to see the entirety of a fighting style in one viewing if I so desire. However, I refuse to pick apart other people's fighting styles, and I refuse to use my memory to create a variation of the Sharingan. I believe that stealing from your comrades is one of the worst things you can do, so I use the stored knowledge in an interesting way. I have my golems replicate what I've seen, and consider this, I'm constantly recording everything I see. And I don't want to become like Hadake-san, so I use my gift to help others. Instead of teaching stolen techniques, I use the knowledge to allow people to view themselves in the third person and improve their own training by seeing how they fight. Guy was taken aback by this, as it was a brilliant use of something like that. Given how Kakashi acted with his copying eye, he could clearly see how the teen's memory could be considered a curse. Neji, Lee, and Tenten were struck by a mixture of awe and mild endearment. It was a rather obscure, but extremely useful ability, and the blonde had found a way to not waste the knowledge while also not really doing anything with it other than allowing others to view themselves and hone techniques. They observed their respective golems and realized that it was a near-perfect replica of each of their fighting styles. They sat down for a few minutes to observe themselves, each picking up a few things to work on the next day from watching the miniatures fight. Tenten was intrigued as to how many Tenten obtained all of her weapons, and Naruto responded with a slight smirk and a cryptic response. Tenten-san, the wonders of elemental manipulation know no bounds. Guy immediately caught on to what he was saying, and vowed to himself to teach the three their respective elemental affinities. Before long, their training session was over, and Naruto bid them a farewell before vanishing in a flurry of ice crystals, which held in the air for a moment, twinkling and sparkling, before evaporating as well. Kakashi's residence. Hadake Kakashi was currently dozing off after a long day of contemplation at the memorial stone. He wasn't as naturally angsty as Inari or Sasuke, but he had a lot to angst about. His old teammate, Uchiha Abido, died and left him with his Sharingan eye. He died in a rock slide, and Kakashi blamed himself, believing that if he had simply agreed to go rescue Rin earlier, the stone nins would not have caught them off guard with the rock slide technique. His other teammate, Inuzuka Rin, came in second. Stone Nins had captured her, and his own stubbornness in wanting to complete the mission rather than save her had cost him dearly. By the time he arrived to save her, she had been severely injured from her escape attempt, and she only lived long enough to use a medical jutsu to fully transplant Abido's eye into Kakashi's socket before succumbing to blood loss. Finally, his sensei, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime, arrived. He had given his life about 15 years ago to seal the demon away, and Kakashi blamed the Jinchuriki for his sensei's death. The fox was the most powerful of the Biju. Surely its influence had corrupted the container. Of course, the idea that the seal was completely foolproof never occurred to him, given that his sensei was a brilliant man with seals, and he blamed it all on the Jinchuriki. Then that new blonde student of his has the audacity to surround himself with a Kyuubi doll and even uses it in a fight. Naruto was apparently unrecognizable without his trademark blue eyes and whisker marks on his cheeks. Because of his laziness, Kakashi had never bothered to learn the Jinchuriki's name, instead recognizing it by its gold hair, blue eyes, and whisker marks. Also, because he was uncaring about anything other than the Uchiha, he didn't care that almost everyone else in the village knew that his student was the same Jinchuriki, because every time someone brought it up to him, he was too preoccupied with his porn to notice. We can only hope that the man will eventually develop a functioning brain. He was currently thinking about how his student had gold hair, purple eyes, and a Kyuubi doll. His abilities did not appear to use chakra, and he was the right age to match the Jinchuriki before it vanished. Kyuubi had bright red eyes. Purple is formed by combining blue and red. He was distracted from his train of thought just as he made the connection by a strange draft across his face. That's strange. I always wear my mask, so the only way I could detect a draft is. In the darkness of his bedroom, he bolted up in bed, his eyes wide. He removed the hit from his head, allowing his sharing eye to hopefully pierce the darkness, but was blinded by a bright flash of white light before he could see who removed his mask. Several other flashes followed, as did the familiar click sound of a camera firing. He blinked quickly to clear his vision and horribly mangle whoever was the newest attempter on seeing his unmasked face, but by the time his vision returned to normal, his assailant had vanished, leaving only a single snowflake fluttering in the breeze. He vowed to track down anyone who could figure out what he looked like, destroy the camera, and destroy all copies of those photos. He was about to break into a berserker frenzy when his thoughts returned to where they were going. The Jinchuriki was his blonde student whom he despised. He had more reason to kill him now, and he'd be celebrated as a hero for it. He was almost ecstatic with the news, and promptly forgot about the intruder who had seen his face as he began to plot how he would kill his student. Fortunately, he never taught the demon anything, despite the fact that his powers were already immense. Just more evidence that the fox was duping the child. Let us leave him to his fantasies, shall we? Naruto is back. Naruto appeared in the Hokage's office in a flurry of delicate snowflakes, startling the current Jounin meeting. He couldn't care less right now because he had pictures of Kakashi's face and nothing could ruin his good mood. Not even the outlandish amount of hatred emanating from the majority of the Jounin in the room. He strode up to the Hokage with purpose, before tapping his temple and forming a transparent screen of pure mana on the wall behind his desk. His first words shocked everyone in the room. Hokage-sama, I've returned from my self-imposed SSS class mission, and I was successful. I have both physical and mental evidence of what Hatake-san looks like behind that mask. While I wait for the photos to be ready for printing, allow me to show you what he looks like from memory. The screen briefly flickered before an image appeared on it. It was Hatake Kakashi, no mask or hit on his face, eyes wide and unseeing. The scar across his left eye was quite visible, but nobody seemed to mind. The man's expression was flawless, unblemished skin, pale from a lack of sunlight, adorned where the face mask would normally be, with only a tan line marking where the mask would normally be. Many of the Jounin Kunoichi were staring in awe, shock, and lust at the perfect face. They didn't mind that the demon was the one who finally finished the mission because he had finished it and there were results. Yuyuhi Kurenai, Jinjutsu Mistress, and Mitarashi Anko, Snake Mistress and Torturer Extraordinaire, were two notable exceptions. They were looking at Naruto with a mixture of awe and regret. But Naruto couldn't care less at the moment, as he let the image float in the air for a few seconds before returning to his mind. He politely nodded to the shell-shocked room before bowing slightly and exiting politely. I apologize for interrupting your meeting, Hokage-sama, but I felt that because it was such a special occasion, you could forgive me. After relaying that, he vanished into thin air, his shunshin more dramatic than ever. As he vanished, a swirl of ice prisms the size of half a kunai ascended in his wake. They all refracted the light in a brilliant array across the room before shattering and evaporating with a slight tinkling sound. After getting over their shock at seeing Kakashi's face, many people had their jaws on the floor at such an elaborate technique. That feat required enormous control as well as elemental manipulation. However, one Jounin stood out from the crowd. He had just been released from ANBU after serving the standard 4-year sentence, and his name was Tenzo, though he preferred the moniker Yamato. He was thinking, if he could recreate Hayaten, would he also be able to recreate Mokuten? The ex-ANBU decided to have a brief discussion with Naruto about the possibilities. He didn't care if the boy was a Jinchuriki or not, because the Shodaime Hokage's bloodline was divided into two parts. The first was the wood element, and the second was the ability to suppress the influence of a demon. If the teen tried to use his demon's power, he'd just suppress it with his own, and he was confident he could fight off the boy without the Kyuubi. That night, Naruto crept into Kakashi's house with the grace of a cat, making no noise. He concealed himself with a mana construct and was able to disperse his scent throughout the area, preventing anyone from locating him by nose. With 3 of the 5 senses gone, and he doubted he'd be licked by the Jounin, he was left with only touch, which he could easily avoid. He moved quickly through the area, leaving no trace of his presence. He was certain that this was even riskier than removing the man's mask, but it had to be done. He arrived at the location where he needed to be, the bedroom. He crept through the doorway, pausing briefly to ensure the man's breathing was even while sleeping. He went onto the closet, reaching out with a steady hand. He proceeded to his final and most dangerous task after modifying the man's clothing. The doll on his head was almost hyperventilating from the tension, and Naruto decided that instead of a physical transformation, he would have to use Genjutsu. He wove an intricate spell pattern through the air with his mana, the violet light flickering for a moment before it faded, indicating that the spell had been cast. He then dashed out of there, taking care not to leave any trace. 9 a.m. the next day. A deafening scream of NOOO. Of course, Kakashi was always late for anything, including sunrise. Naruto, who was currently waiting at Training Ground 7 with Sasuke and Sakura, nearly snickered in delight. He was certain the man would be thoroughly humiliated today, as he had cast a spell on each of the spandex suits that would last 24 hours, immolate any clothing worn over them, and latch onto the man's skin like a leech, preventing him from removing one. And, because all of his other clothes had vanished, it was either spandex or a towel until he could find acceptable clothing. But Kakashi wouldn't go outside in just a towel. He struggled to keep a straight face as his sensei arrived, face mask in place because he was too afraid of the man catching him if he tried to remove the mask again. However, that was the only normal thing about his teacher. Hatake Kakashi was dressed in a form-fitting green spandex bodysuit. Naruto mused to himself that he was a great judge of body size because he got the man's size right on the first try. Kakashi's one eye was blazing with rage at anything and everything in the vicinity, and it would have been quite frightening if his gray hair hadn't been styled in a shiny bowl cut reminiscent of Mato Guy. The man's enraged gaze finally fell on him and his current project. He had a mini Konoha with some nice details, and it was currently being destroyed by an ice Kyuubi. He wasn't quite there yet with his ice manipulation because it was a new element that needed to be worked on for a little longer than his daily training with the others until he was just as proficient in it as he was in the others. Kakashi stormed up to his blonde student, intent on causing him harm because his newfound knowledge of the student's Jinchuriki status allowed him to blame him for anything and everything. He yelled at the blonde, almost sputtering with rage, and pointed an accusing finger at her. "You, this is what you did to me." Naruto raised an eyebrow, slightly questioningly. He let his gaze wander over his sensei's attire, and replied with a mock-innocent expression. "Oh, how can you be so certain, Hatake-san? Do you have any evidence?" Kakashi began to sputter incoherently as it became clear that he had no idea who had done it. He was certain, however, that he could blame the Jinchuriki. "You demon, I know you did it. You had to have done it. You had to be jealous that Sasuke was outperforming you in training, and you tried to blame me for it." With this statement, Naruto's lone brow rose closer to his hairline. Even Kyuubi seemed to be looking at the man with suspicion. It appears he has finally figured it out. What does it matter? He despised me before, and he will despise me even more now. So be it. The teen took his time standing up and gave the man a cold glare that made Kyuubi's ice golem look like a boiling desert, nearly making the newly spandex-clad Jounin step back in fear. But he was a Jounin, and he wasn't going to be intimidated by this demon. "Hatake-san, I advise you to stop making illogical accusations when you lack evidence. I am actually much stronger than you, so as long as I can defeat you in combat, I couldn't care less about what you teach Sasuke. I'm irritated that you think I'd stoop so low as to lash out at you, as you put it. However, your face mask is now effectively useless, as it appears that someone has infiltrated your home and taken numerous photographs of your face beneath the mask. They appear to have spread throughout the village, and I believe I can hear your fan club approaching." The sound of stampeding footsteps began to shake the ground, and a loud squeal of "Kakashi-kun" rent the air, causing everyone to tremble in fear. Kakashi quickly forgot about his hatred for his student and handed Sasuke 3 Chunin exam applications, telling him that he had nominated the team for the Chunin exams, which would begin in about a month. He then took off, hoping to outrun his horde of adoring fans. Naruto approached Sasuke's still shocked form, took a paper from it, and vanished in a swirl of snowflakes, heading for Training Grounds 27. 27th Training Ground. Naruto appeared in his own teleportation spell, his lips slightly raised in a smirk. He approached Guy, tapped his finger against his own temple once, and a large screen appeared in the air, with a still image of Kakashi's new look on it for Team 9 to see. Neji stifled a snicker, Tenten burst out laughing, and Guy and Lee began to hug each other, proclaiming that Kakashi had finally discovered his youthfulness. He felt someone was closely watching him, so he decided to find out who it was and bid the team farewell before disappearing in a gust of Arctic wind, giving the entire team a brief chill. He reappeared in the surrounding forest, accompanied by the same gust of freezing wind, a few feet to the side of a Jounin who was spying on him. He decided he was in a good mood and wouldn't hurt the man. Yet, unless he didn't have a good reason to be spying on him, and asked his question. "How come you're spying on me, Jounin-san?" Yamato, the spy, blinked quickly in surprise when he realized he had been discovered before regaining his composure. At least the teen was respectful, though it was clear he was suspicious of being spied on. Due to Kakashi's lazy drawl at all the meetings he had attended, He had heard a little about the blonde's fighting abilities, but most of the copy speeches Nin's tended to be about how Sasuke was progressing. He answered as truthfully as he could, deciding that he might as well get right to the point. I saw your ability to create the fusion element of ice during yesterday's Jounin meeting, and was wondering if you could create any others. Naruto was taken aback by this because he hadn't detected any malice from the man while he was speaking, and he seemed genuinely interested. He gave a slight shrug before answering the man, as it was a reasonable reason to be spying on him, though he warned him not to try it again if he liked living. I haven't been able to recreate the others to my satisfaction, so I'm waiting for people with the fusion elements' respective bloodlines to give me advice on how to combine the two. On my C-rank mission, I met a Hyoten user who gave me the much-needed hint to make my ice manipulation viable. I can do some of the other fusion elemental manipulations, but they aren't very satisfying to me, so I don't use them very often. I've trained as far as I can without learning exactly how the fusion element works, and I've hit a brick wall until I find someone with the bloodline to help me with that. Before making his decision, the Jounin nodded slightly because it seemed logical. He gave the blonde a slight smile before disappearing in the usual whirl of leaves, his response to the black mage floating on the wind. I see. Well, my name is Yamato, and I am Konoha's sole user of Mokyuten. If you can show me that you're worth it, I'll give you information on how the wood element works. For the time being, I notice your ice manipulation still requires practice, and I will wait until you have brought it up to par with your other elements before testing you. Naruto had a sly grin on his face as he took this as a challenge. He vanished in another shunshin, a large pillar of ice engulfing him before exploding into multiple shards of ice floating in the air before dissipating. He decided he needed to train a little more than usual before the Chunin exams.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.